Hello, everyone, and welcome to Spiral Dynamics Integral Live. So today we have Tsafrir Or, our Israeli friend, who is SD informed and SD Spiral Dynamics enthusiast. And he's a video creator in Israel and has Spiral Dynamics sort of through Value Match. And he's going to present to us today his own Memetic insights into the Israeli-Palestinian Palestinian conflict. And also I invited a friend, Sal, who is Palestinian. And even though this is Tsafrir's presentation, he was gracious enough to say, no problem, she can join us and she can share her views too. So she will join us a little later to give her views after Tsafrir's presentation over. And with that, you can go ahead, Tsafrir, and get started.
Okay, great. Hello, my name is impossible to say in English, so forget it. First of all, I'm sorry about my English. My teacher was from India, so I have a strange Indian Hebrew accent. And I asked Veronica to keep her microphone open. And if I'm saying something that is really, you can't understand, so you're ready to jump in. So I know it's the second time in this group that we discussed in the Israel-Palestine conflict. Last one were just a few weeks ago. So in order to make it a little different, I'm trying to look at the conflict from a different angle, for more spiral dynamic memetic angle. And I'm Israeli, so I do my best not to be pro-Israeli, but I know it's impossible. Also, when I'm speaking about the inner conflict, I give more details about the inner conflict in the Israeli society, just because I don't know enough about the conflict of the Palestinian society, and that may be something that Sal could add at the end. So let's start. On the last presentation you had here, Matthew said that Israel holding all the cards in the conflict. And yes, I agree. From green perspective, Israel hold all the cards. She is the power, she have the military, and she is responsible for the conflict from green perspective. But if you look at it from yellow perspective, we find that we have a gamma trap, both in the Israeli government and in the Palestinian government. Both of them are in some kind of trap that their values are not evolved enough to solve this conflict. Okay, this gamma trap cause, and I will go through it fast because on last presentation you were talking about it a lot. Palestinian human rights violation by Israeli soldiers and Israeli settlers. We have some terror attack on Israelis. In the last 15 years, it's mostly missiles from Gaza, not like it was before, but before that there was some terror attack. We have Israeli settlement on the West Bank, which is, of course, a big obstacle for two-state solution. The situation and the conflict deepening, the inner conflict on both sides makes the extremists more dominant. And we have the surge of red VMM in both sides. In really general, to understand the trap of the conflict, this is a central narrative of the Israeli and Palestinian way of thinking, the stories that they're telling to themselves. Of course, it's general, it's like the center. There are many other Palestinians that think different, many other Israelis, Jewish that think different. So Israelis say, we must have a Jewish state in order to be safe. The Palestinians don't want a Jewish state to exist. Therefore, permitting free Palestinian states is too risky for our survival. Also, we can't accept back the refugees from the 48 war to the Israeli territories. We will talk later about the 48 refugees. Palestinian central narrative say the Jewish took our land. We will not accept a Jewish state on our land. The refugees from the 48 war must have right to return. And both of the sides are right from their point of view. And this is one of the traps of the conflict. And we have another narratives, the narratives that is becoming bigger and bigger during the years. And this is the narrative of the extremists. The Israeli extremists say the land has been given to us by God and the history. Our life purpose is to accomplish the prophecy of ruling the biblical Jewish state, which includes the West Bank, and facilitating the Messiah coming. It's like the Jesus second coming of the Judaism. Palestinian extremist narrative, like other jihadist organization around the world, we are following Allah's command and to wage jihad, to fight and eliminate all non-Muslim or make them surrender and convert. Jews that took our land are the worst enemies. We have another trap, which is a politician traps in both sides. In both sides, we had the politicians that try to make peace, but the way of thinking and the experience of their trying to do peace say this: if we make peace, we won't have the support of the people. We will lose our position, our chair, and potentially close extremists to blow up the Middle East. So it's another trap that's happening. And we have another narrative, which is common, it's not a conflict, which is the human rights, the peace narrative. We have it both in Palestine and in the Israeli Jewish society. We can say that until 1995 or 2000, this narrative was fighting for the two-state solution, for having identity for the Palestinian and identity for the Israelis as a Jewish state, and they're working sometimes together, sometimes separate, to have a two-state solution. After 2000, after the second Intifada, which we will discuss later, what's the organization of the human rights do mainly is monitor the settlement and the IDF to protect the Palestinian human rights. Now, and it's important to say, because in your presentation, I didn't hear nothing about it. Those organizations are pretty powerful and have a lot of international support. And without them, the human rights been much worse. But from the other hand, the human rights activists, mainly in Israel, I don't know exactly what happened in Palestine, but mainly in Israel, those activists did some side effect that the right-wing policy and the right-wing society start or begin to fight the left as a peace process because of those human rights organization. So the extremists become more extreme because of the activity of the human rights. Okay, I will go now through the memetic history of the Palestinian and the Israelis. We'll go parallel Palestinians and Israeli log by log through the timeline. Those are, of course, not all the points that happen in history. Those are some main points that I marked in order to help understand how this conflict becomes so complicated. And of course, from a memetic point of view. So we start maybe with the early history of the Palestinian. There is a stupid argument if there is such thing as Palestinian identity or not. For me, it doesn't matter. Today, we have people that identify themselves as Palestinian and they need to get something in order to have a good life. So I didn't start it like from all the history, but we know that during the Ottoman Empire, we had already the name of Palestine, and there was some identity of Palestine in this earth, which is not Christian or Muslim or Jews. But on the years of the Ottoman Empire, which is, you can see the years up there, the country had very small population. It was mostly agriculture people, so the identity were mainly tribal. It was different Muslim, but also Christian and some Jews identities, and all of them was separate to different churches or different tribes or different Jewish attitude. And at the end of the 18th century, you can see the population, and this was after the growth of the population. Before that, it was even less. So the Jewish, before the Zionist movement started, probably all of you heard about the biblical Judah and the biblical Zion, all those holy stories and the temples that had been built and destroyed and been built and destroyed. So I started the history about 70 AD, after the Roman destroyed the second temple. And on the year following to that, Jews started to live the biblical Zion, the biblical Judah. And Jews spread all over the world, but mainly in Europe. The center of the power of the Judaism stayed in Europe. What kept the Jews keeping their identity and their longing to come back to Israel? The identity were sophisticated blue by following the biblical and the holy script, and also by organizing small purple communities that separate them from the countries that they were living in. In addition, they had very low red resistance to the country that they were living in, so that kept their identity alive for almost 2,000 years. But most of the time, the life conditions of Jews were unsafe. So they always feel that they are not exactly in the right place. But the Zionist idea until the end of the 19th century didn't really become practical. The Jews also evolved some orange tactic. This is why we know the stereotype of Jew banker, Jew rich people, Jew lawyers. It's because they had a lot of people that occupied in those occupation, and that gave some property to Jews at this time. Okay, in 1897, the Fourth Jewish Congress in Basel. This is where the dream of the modern Zionists came into practice. It's important to understand that this did not come from core religious movement. It came from more of a blue-orange vision by secular and educated European Jews. Before this Congress, there were a few, or about 100 years of what known as the Jewish Enlightenment movement, Haskalah. This movement came into practice because they want to integrate in the country that they were living, which was not Israel. They want to live in Europe, to be part of Europe. So they tend to be less religion and most integrate in the politics, in the society, in the new science world. And many Jews believe that when they will integrate, the violence against the Jewish will stop. And it didn't happen. A lot of violence keep occurring towards the Jewish, towards the Jews. So the Zionists came true because it was a healthy blue and orange way of thinking, because we cannot get any safety in Europe. We have to find a solution. And the Zionist idea came to life. Okay, we go now back to Palestine Memetic history. In 1917, the British Empire, after the First World War, took the country or received the country. And under the British order and safety returned. At the beginning, British supported the establishment of a Jewish state, and that caused waves of Jewish immigration from Europe. The reaction of the local Palestinians was in violence towards the Jews. There were 3 periods of times where it erupted, where Arabs start to attack Jews, and Jews, of course, return, and that caused red in the Palestinian Arab to go up, to increase. When the conflict between the Jews and the Palestinians, Arabic Palestinians, start to become stronger, the British decide to withdraw from the Jewish state, and they stop encouraging Jews immigration. From the Jews' perspective, under the British Empire, at the beginning it was very good. We can start and build the Zionist dream, but when they start to get attacked from the local Arabic, they start to grow some red. For the first time in the Jews' history, it was red. Of course, from Jews' perspective, it was a healthy red. And they also use this red in order to resist the British, to bring more refugees to Israel, more Jews under the British army. It's important to notice that in this time, before Israel were even established, we started to see some clashes inside the Jewish society, which is what you see on the right, the clash between the left and the right. And those conflicts still exist till today. The left attitude was we want to be diplomatic, we want blue-orange values, we want to live in peace with all Arabic countries. And the right said the only way to establish Jewish country is by power, and this is a blue-red value. At this moment, it wasn't a religious blue-red values. It came from a survival mode. Okay, now we go to the years where the country, the Israel country were established. In 1947, the UN General Assembly partition plan. You see the map on the left. This is a two-state solution. And the Israeli leadership agree to this plan, and the Palestinian reject it. So in 1948, a war started where, in addition to the local Palestinian, Egypt, Syria, Jordan, and Iraq army attack the Jewish areas. And the result of the war were pretty bad from Palestinian point of view, because they had about 700,000 refugees, what be known as a Palestinian Nakba. And it's an important point to understand, because most of the peace, international peace initiation, talking about the 67 lines that you can see on the map on the right. But the Palestinian, or at least large groups of Palestinians, claim that they want to go back to the 48 places. From Israel point of view, it was a war of independence, and the win were a big win. And I just want to talk for a minute about the Memetic point of view of the Israeli Jews at this time. It's different. It's very different than now, because it was after the Second World War and the Holocaust. Most of the Jewish immigrants that came from Europe have nowhere to return, because all their house and property been looted. Most of the family been murdered in the Holocaust. So they were in a very aggressive survival mode. They have nowhere to go back now. And that, in this state of mind, for them, it seems pretty logic that the Palestinians that attack them and live in what they believe is the Jewish territory should leave the country, and we should prevent them from getting back, because this is what they did to us all over Europe. This is how the world, this is a game of life. So for them, they didn't have any guilt because of the huge Palestinian refugees. And this is a big problem till today, those refugees. I'm going back to the Palestinian Memetic history. After the 48 war, West Bank was under Jordan, but Jordan didn't clearly want it to be part of Jordan, and also the Palestinians didn't want to be exactly part of Jordan. And I won't go too deep into it, but there was some kind of inner war in Jordan between the Palestinian refugees and the Jordanians. And at the end, many of the Palestinian refugees had to leave Jordan and move to Lebanon. Let's go to the 1967 Six-Day War. Israel won again, and took the West Bank and Gaza Strip. And since then to now, Israel is ruling the West Bank. And we had another 250,000 Palestinian refugees. Some were allowed to go back, some didn't. But red, of course, in the Palestinian society increased. The tribal village life that they had becoming more and more rare, because now there are refugees, and the red keep increasing in the Palestinian. And that was, of course, healthy for them in order to get some security in their life. Now, in Israel, in 1948 to 1967, before the Six-Day War, it was 20 years of constant fear of survival of Israel. Waves of immigration from North Africa and other Arab countries adding to the red values. Remember that the country was established by European orange value, blue-orange value immigrant. And now they receive about 1 million immigrants from Arabic country, which never developed any healthy blue or healthy orange. And those citizens till today feel that they are second best to the old leadership. And in order to find their identities, they develop a lot of red values. Sometimes it's healthy, sometimes it's unhealthy, but from 1948 to 1967, the leadership stayed the same leadership, blue-orange, but under the surface, there's a lot of orange powers that came to life. And the most important movement that was below the surface, and it took a long time to understand it, was a religious Zionist. The religious Zionists, when the country was established, were really on the side of the sides. They were not part of the government. And they start to become more and more powerful and greed about establishing blue-red belief of achieving some God prophecy of ruling against the whole land. And it started to bubble up, but it didn't really show up on the surface until after the Six-Day War. So we are still in the Israeli after the 1967 win. This was the first time that Jews felt some safety, and that gave rise to old orange and green. But also it helped the red-blue value that we talked about earlier, the religious ideal, to pop up. And the first settlement on the West Bank was start to build. And the dream of the Messiah, the arrival, start to be more popular. It still were mostly for religious, but it started to pop up because of the safety. It's important to notice that in 1969, Yasser Arafat becomes a leader of the PLO. The PLO is a Palestine Liberation Organization. And Yasser Arafat were, to my understanding, very center leader. He was, from healthy point of view, he was a liberation warrior. From unhealthy, he was only red. He couldn't evolve any healthy blue later on. And the under Yasser Arafat leadership, a lot of Israeli and Jews targets were attacked, and red continued to go up to increase in the Palestinian population. Also, what happened in Israeli society that gave rise to the red was a political shift in 1977. The right gained power in the election of 77 due to the support of the red-blue religious that we just spoke about, that pop up, and the purple-red immigrants from Arabic country that felt that they are not part of the old leadership, and they voted for the more aggressive red-blue right. And that gave power till today to red-blue politician in the Israeli parliament. Okay, the first Intifada, the Stone War. This was the first time that there was a big claim for Palestinian country by the Palestinians, for the Palestinian liberation. The causes of this to erupt in 1987 was first the Jewish settlement that start to be more and more be built more and more. The Palestinian population growth versus economic, less support from Arabic country. Jordan, for instance, gave up its demand on the West Bank. Egypt and Israel made peace agreement and left the Palestinian out. And Iran Islamic revolution. So it gave rise to the first red peak. Now we usually call it the Stone War because the Palestinian at this moment expressed, to my opinion, very healthy red. They didn't use almost heavy warm weapons, only stones and sticks. So the army, when the Israeli army reacted, it was like was very powerful image to see as a Palestinian, and this gave a lot of love or attention to the Palestinians. From Israeli point of view, the first Intifada a bit surprised Israel. So at the first years, the attitude was to suppress this by power, by army. But after a few years, they changed to a healthy, practical orange, at least at the leadership, not all the people. And the orange and the green start to grow up toward a peace agreement with the PLO, which led to the Oslo Agreement in 1995. And it woke up some healthy green code in the Israeli side. Again, I'm still with the Jewish Israelis. Yes, it's the same. The orange-green came up, but threaded the blue religious establishment and the red political right. That had continued to increase the political conflict until today. In 1995, the Oslo Agreement was signed. From the Palestinian point of view, it also did some conflict, a big conflict, and maybe Sal could talk about it later, inside the Palestinian society, but it gave rise to some healthy blue and healthy orange in the Palestinian society. And some red shift down, because there was some hope for getting a country. And in Israel, 1995 were a year of hope for the orange and green side because of Oslo Agreement, but also it was Rabin assassination time. Rabin was a prime minister that do the peace process with Jordan and with the PLO. So I quote here one of Rabin's famous quote, which was the main policy of Israel at 1995. We'll fight terror like there's no peace and make peace like there's no terror. This explains the failure of the peace process. This attitude, which fighting all the time fighting the red religion, Palestinian, but also the red bluish religion, Israelis, ignore large dominant red populations that didn't want this peace. The peace pushed them to adopt green values, which they didn't have the capacity to adapt. Red power became more extreme and violent, and Rabin were assassinated at the end of 1995. After 1995, the peace process started to collapse slowly. And before 2000, the second Intifada, both sides start to violate the Oslo Agreement. I know that Israel also violates some of it, and for sure Yasser Arafat was violate some of it. Yasser Arafat, after his death, there is some historian and documentary movies about people that were very close to him, including his wife and his assistant. And they claim that Yasser Arafat tells them many times that he's not going to fulfill the Oslo Agreement. He never planned on becoming a blue leader. In his mind, he was a liberation warrior all of his life. So this may explain the Palestinian side, but also in the Israeli side, the settlers and the right were against this peace, and they also pushed to violate the Oslo Agreement. So let's go to 2000. 2000 is a second Intifada. After 5 years of Oslo Agreement, which means that the Palestinians get their own police force, get weaponed, and control the major areas at the West Bank and in Gaza, there started to be a big clash. At one day, the Palestinian soldiers or police that were working together with the IDF, with the Israeli army, they were patrolling together to keep the peace. In one day, they start to shoot at each other. And after that, a lot of suicide bombers were started to attack Israelis' target. And that was, of course, the highest red peak in the Palestinian population. And from Palestinian, of course, they wanted to get their liberation, and they wanted to get the 48 refugees back to Israel, but mostly it was anger from right anger on the Israelis, but Israel had no choice from its perspective, and so in 2002, Israel took back control on the West Bank in a military campaign, and in 2003 started to build the separation wall, the famous separation wall. So for the from Israeli point of view, the second Intifada is maybe the biggest trauma till today. Many Israelis believe after Oslo Agreement that we can rest. Now we will have peace. Yes, we have extremists here and there, but history is on our side. Peace is coming. So the red and the orange powers of Israel start to focus on different targets, and the red bluish target in Israel become more and more powerful. And when the second Intifada started and buses started to blow up in the center of the cities, and for Israel it was more than 1,000 people that had been killed and many more injured, it was much less than Palestinian, but for the Israelis it was psychologically a big trauma that said, okay, we cannot trust the Palestinian, and that gave rise to the red, and Israeli green become weaker since then. Now, what happened between 2000 and today? What happened in the West Bank is mostly that the local police, Palestinian police, keep the population quiet, and there is small violation, small terror, and a lot of violation of human rights from the settlers and the army, but it's 15 years of managing the conflict. But in Gaza happened a big change. In Gaza Strip, in 2006, Israel evacuated Gaza. For Prime Minister Sharon, that did it, part of it was like a lab scientific test. Let's see what happened if we evacuate all the soldiers, all the settlement, and we let the Palestinian do their own governing. What will happen to the Israeli society? What will happen to the Palestinian society? And this lab test failed completely. The Hamas coup in Gaza, they took from the PLO leadership by power Gaza, and that led to 15 years of really tyrant leadership in Gaza, which fighting the PLO, which are located in the West Bank in some ways, but also fighting the Israeli forces and launching missiles on Israeli civilian targets. Israel react with blockade on Gaza, not on the West Bank, and had been 4 bombing campaigns on Gaza, which probably all of you saw on the news. And this again gave more peak to red, and all peace process stopped and died. From Israel perspective, the 2006, after evacuating Gaza and Hamas took over, this was the second trauma. This trauma is still living almost every month, because almost every month Israeli gets some kind of missile from the Hamas and reminder. So that keep the unsafety alive in the Israeli society, and that keeps the right being strong, and that keep the conflict from both sides exist. Now, something else that happened in the Israeli society is that Benjamin Netanyahu becomes a prime minister. Benjamin Netanyahu main code is red, or red-blue Jewish, with some healthy orange, but his red attitude said, hey guys, I don't want to make a peace anymore. Let's stop all the peace process. In Instead, I'm gonna manage the conflict. By managing the conflict, I mean I will make the Palestinian as weak as I can and make the Jewish Israeli as strong as I can. So this is what happened in the last 14 years with Netanyahu prime minister. And of course, this just makes the conflict worse and worse, makes the Palestinians suffer more and more, and makes the Israeli politics more and more extreme from both sides. I just want to notice that last month, Bibi Netanyahu had to left his chair, and now we have a right plus left government, which doesn't have the power to do peace at the moment, at least not from Israeli perspective. Okay, Veronica, how much time do I have?
You can keep going. We started at 10 after, so you have at least another 10. I think another 10.
I will try to go fast. Okay, so the conflict memetic reason. Look at the animation. Okay, one reason for the conflict during all the history, it's the purple red of the Palestinian against the blue orange of the Zionist. The purple red is not a problem of the Palestinians, it's a problem of all the Middle East. Elza Makhlouf did a beautiful research about it that Said published. Probably some of you saw it on different groups. So the purple red that keep expressing itself in the Middle East, say no order and very difficult to have a central control on the population. My way or no way, winning by resistance, driven by honor and power. And the blue-orange by Zionist is better in receiving law and order, on strategic planning, winning by technology and diplomacy, driven by ideology and success. These powers make the Israeli side much stronger when it comes to technology and army, and also in economy. This is why the conflict is so asymmetric, but it also keep clashing different values between the population. Conflict 2 is inner Israeli, that from one side, Israel wants to keep its Jewish identity, but from other side, she wants to be a modern democracy. So the Jewish identity is dominant blue, which redemption of the Jews, the chosen people, the motivation is a biblical prophecy, and it's thousands of years of religious studies that kept the Jews' legacy, and we have to keep it alive. So the democracy said we don't care so much about the religious identity. We just want safe house for the Jews, because we are not safe in other places around the world. We are okay with multi-religious states. Our motivation, our solution for the European Jews that were unsafe in Europe, and we want to adopt new modern ideas. So these ideas, this value system keep clashing inside the Israeli, which prevent it from getting one way of making peace. All the time they are clashing each other, and the leadership is changing from this to this. Another dominant effect was red dominant leadership. Yasser Arafat, when he had the chance to adopt healthy blue after the Oslo Agreement, he didn't succeed to do it. We explained about it earlier. and Benjamin Netanyahu in the past 15 years, which killed all the hope and gave rise to a lot of red, blue, and orange Jewish identity. Now I'm starting to talk about solution. Most of the world and both sides are focusing on green solution. Let's make peace. Let's live together as neighbors. And the green solution obviously failed and keep failing. So I'm trying to show here the difference between green point of view and what a yellow point of view can be on this conflict. So green say Israel shouldn't control the West Bank. And of course, from green, it's completely true. Yellow thinking said Israel developed red-blue code in order to survive in its life condition. And because it didn't have safe life condition, it's hard for them to develop a healthy green country that could evacuate the West Bank. Green said Palestinians should have a right for self-definition. Yellow say, and this was one of the main conclusions from Elza and Don Beck research back in 1906, 1908 research here in the area. Palestinians haven't developed yet healthy blue and orange in order to have a healthy self-definition. So there's a danger that right now, with the values that motivated the Palestinian society, if they have identity, it might be similar to Syria and to Lebanon and to other tyrant states in the Middle East. So we have to be very careful about the Palestinian identity and to assist it to develop a healthy one. Green say Israel shouldn't build settlement at all. Yellow said because life conditions for Israeli are unsafe, the population keep expressing red-blue. And it's hard to, I can tell you from Israelis that many years I was involved in green peace movement. And each time that you try to fight politically or legally the red-blue powers, it's very difficult because they have strong power in the country. They haven't evolved from this red-blue. Green say Israel has all the power and she's the only one to blame the conflict. Of course, from yellow, unhealthy red and blue on both sides need to be addressed in order to solve the conflict. What can the international community do to support solving the conflict? Now, this is my, insight. You may argue about them. Okay, one, not two. The core of the conflict at this moment is a red bluish religious leader, also in the Palestinian and in the Israeli side. And not only the politician. Most of the effort of the international pressure is on the politician. But the people that really make the conflict is a red-blue leader. Money and effort should be addressed directly to those leaders instead of Greenpeace organization and politician. Support the Palestinian leadership to evolve toward a healthy blue and orange. This is a major problem. It's hard to do peace without a strong leadership or a strong identity of at least blue from Israeli point of view. The Israeli right wing, which the Israeli right wing is a lot of religious, but also a lot of non-religion people that say the only way we can survive is by power. So the right wing is under constant fear from the international community and the Israeli left. They feel that their voice is unheard. Those groups and leaders can and should be more involved in the dialogue with the international community. Those are the people that are preventing from peace happening, not the other side of the Israelis. Okay, maybe I'm a bit aggressive here, but I don't see right now any other solution. Gaza is under jihadist Hamas. Israeli core activity is no different than ISIS. Most of the population in Gaza are victims of those tyrant minority. An international military campaign should be considered the same as is been with ISIS. If Israel attempt to do it, and they did attempt to do it, it's only deepening the problem. Israel cannot solve this problem, and I don't see how it can. If somebody wants to solve the problem, I believe the only way is with international intervention. Because Gaza right now, people are dying from starvation there. It's the worst. It's completely beige. It's really this. Every day that nobody take care of this problem is a disaster for the Palestinian people. Okay, the American evangelist. This is a blind spot for most of the world, and it's very important. The American evangelist supporting the settlement by money and politics, Trump case for instance, and it comes from blue-red ideologies that support war in the region that will lead to Armageddon and the Jesus' second coming. The leader of this church must be addressed in some way to grow healthier and more responsible leadership. And the same with Iran that's supporting the Palestinian Red Movement. Now, I hope that you can hear the sound. If not, I just want to show you a trailer of a documentary that is about 5 minutes. It's with Hebrew subtitle, but the rest is in English. Enjoy.
When the Christian community speaks about what they think is going to happen and what they envision as a Jewish person, I relate to 99% of it. But the end is different.
Every nation that has blessed Israel, God has blessed them. And every nation that has opposed Israel, God has been in opposition to them.
I know that's a strong word to use, indoctrination, but that's where it starts.
The Apostle Paul said Jesus will come back to the Holy Land. And that's what the evangelicals believe, and they want to support it.
Christians have given through us $1.4 billion to help Israel and the Jewish people.
American evangelicals are a voting bloc of 25% of the American population. Wouldn't we expect to be better represented in government?
Jerusalem is where Messiah will come and establish a kingdom that will never end.
Today we officially open the United States Embassy in Jerusalem, the capital the Jewish people established in ancient times.
We don't believe that Palestine is a place on God's map. That's not evangelicalism. That's fact of history.
The State Department was so afraid to move our embassy to Jerusalem, but to us was a very important signal in prophecy. We've been waiting for that to happen for decades.
So now we're watching end time signs for the second coming of Christ. There's going to be great tribulation in Israel. There's going to be an end time battle, the Battle of Armageddon.
President Trump isn't supporting Israel because of the Jewish community. He's supporting it because of his evangelical followers. This isn't about money. This is bigger than this. This is a strategic partnership of God.
Okay, I'm back here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, and last, this is my work, which right now I cannot talk about it a lot. I believe that in Israel we have a unsafe condition, and it's very unique to the Israeli society, because the attempt to solving the conflicts that came from green created a fertile ground for accepting new ways of thinking inside some of the Israeli population. And maybe even start accepting tier 2 politics. I know it's crazy to think that Israel will be one of the first countries that will have a second-tier politics. The reason I think that we might succeed to have some influence or to help grow some influence of second-tier politics is because Israelis' life conditions are not coping with green values. In most of the European countries, green are enough to have good life condition. In Israel, even if you grow green, you don't solve the problem. So many Israelis start to think what to do, and they're asking questions. So I started to promote in the last year new story and definition of how will the yellow thinking local movement can become real and practical. And any international support to do so will be accepted with much grateful. I put here a link of a video which I promoted it in Hebrew, but it have English subtitle. Of course, we don't have time to see it now, but if you would like and you will get the presentation from Veronica later, you may just click and watch it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for that presentation, Tsafrir. Time into that. So I want to present Sal. She is a Palestinian refugee. She comes from a Palestinian refugee family from Gaza. She was born in the United Arab Emirates. And when she was 17 years old, she went back to Gaza and she lived there for 9 years, where she worked as a journalist. And she spent time with a nonprofit called We Are Not Numbers. So we'll paste that link later in the chat so you guys can check it out, which she feels is a very green organization. She has studied English literature, and she's now back in the United Arab Emirates, where she works as a project manager for a company that does coaching, training coaches and a meeting space for coaches. So I'm really interested in her feedback on the presentation, because I noticed that in the Memetic profiles that Tsafrir made, that Palestine seemed to be very heavily weighted in purple and red, whereas Israelis had a much more nuanced and evened out Memetic profile. So Sal, what do you think? What are your reflections on the presentation and on the Memetic profiles?
Okay, first of all, that was very interesting presentation. Thank you for making this presentation. Tsafrir, I don't, I'm sorry, I don't yet get to remember your name.
Anyway. Said it great.
Okay, thank you. So I have a lot of questions, but let me just first of all say what I think in general about it. But then I will go in detail about why I thought what I thought. So one of the things that I keep seeing coming again and again in the presentation is the fact that I believe maybe you are not really, I would say, well informed on what's actually going on in Palestine or in the Palestinian side, whether in politics or in society or in other different facets. And I can understand this because I myself won't be as informed as I am about the Palestinian side as in the Israeli side. So I would understand that. So basically, I also noticed that, as Veronica noticed as well, that your Memetic figures for Palestinians were way more like lower. I would like not be like barely orange. There's no green. The end, towards the end, you were like mentioning the fact that the Israeli community needed to develop into probably a second tier, like a level yellow solutions, because green itself was not enough for it to develop enough solutions. So they're not living in the, as you said, the right or the best life conditions. So I'm suggesting, why isn't for you the same case, that the same thing, the same line of thinking happened and still happening in the Palestinian side? So why do you think in every agreement, like Oslo Agreement, the Intifadas, and some and other major milestones in our shared history, why I can't see that as there was development in orange green, why was not there development in the other side, which is the Palestinian side, also orange green? Noticing also that these agreements were like shared agreements. These were like shared agreements, like between the Palestinians and the Israelis. So it would make sense that for the Palestinian side to actually agree on the negotiation, agree on the in these types of what you labeled orange type of agreement, they themselves should at least have some aspects of orange and green for such agreement to actually be established in the first place. So if they were really that low, Israel won't be able to have such agreements with them because we will not be listening in the first place. So I'm just thinking that these are some common sense things that I noticed. I feel like they're common. They're like being noticed during your presentation. I would have also other comments as well. And I don't really want to be just sitting here and talk by myself. I would be like liking to ask you some questions and like hear your answers, because I'm really interested to, you know, get some answers from you. So my biggest question, first of all, like before even we begin this meeting, I wanted to understand what's your purpose from doing such presentation. Yes.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Can I? Okay. Okay. Thank you, Sal. Can I respond just one issue? I want to show the memetic map again. I'm just going to put it fast. Okay. And this is not because I'm wanting to argument. I just want to. Can you see it?
Yeah.
I can't see it. Why cannot I see it? Okay.
We saw it for a moment and then it disappeared.
Yeah, for me too. Exactly.
Around the Oslo agreements, you started to see orange, but it was a tiny, tiny, tiny sliver.
Yeah, this, you know, I am my Israeli colleague of Spiral Dynamic. He worked with Elza and Don Beck. In 2002, between 2000 and 2008, they were in Palestinian and Israeli. And he told me, listen, you cannot do this presentation as an Israeli, because when you show this graph, they will say that you are not right. So I really tend to these numbers and these data that happened around here from Elza research. So I try to be as mathematic as I can. So I'm not here to protect the Israeli society. I think the Israeli society is to blame. I'm definitely not it, but in order to, especially from yellow point of view, if you want to solve problem, we have to be aware of, as we can, of the truth. So if this is wrong, then I will be very happy to hear it. And maybe, I don't know, but in order to be fair, I didn't took my own data. I took some Arabic researcher, which is Elza Malouf.
I just want to jump in and question, because both Sal and I have been reading Elza Malouf's research ourselves. And Elza Malouf is Lebanese, Arab Lebanese from a Christian background. So what I get the sense of is that perhaps what's missing in all these memetic studies are the Palestinian perspective, even though in theory they were included in Elza's studies, but I still feel like there hasn't been a strong enough leading figure within the actual Palestinian community that would really make this more balanced, which is why I wanted to have Sel jump in and talk about it. Because Sel, how would you see the memetic distribution? Like, how red do you think that, for example, Gaza, which is the most sort of extreme, we could say, Palestinian territory, the one that's suffering the most, how red do you see that community, or how would you memetically profile it yourself?
Okay, yeah. Since I'm a Palestinian, I'm living with a Palestinian family and relatives. I found Palestinian friends. I lived 9 years in Gaza during the blockade, and I can really say that they're not purple, red. They probably mostly the core is blue, with some really good, healthy orange, very fewer than green. And then there is, of course, there's red and purple. But I guess there is, as Veronica said, and I also looked at Elsa's, statics and stuff and memetic figures. I could see, how they have conveyed or like made these figures. There's like some issues during this research. For example, I would say that number one, it seems like they look at the life conditions of the Palestinians, and then like the life conditions will probably be like purple red. As I agree with them, they stated that, and I agree with them that the life conditions are purple red. But isn't like it's not a thing that if your life conditions is purple red, and that was like influencing the mimic figures, that doesn't mean that the people living in these conditions, in these purple red life conditions, are as well valuing these red purple life conditions. They're probably gonna be, maybe then they could be blue, they could be orange, and I could really state for this because I have seen these people. I myself lived 9 years in in purple red conditions, but I was not purple red values person. So I think there's like this conflation, this confusion happening. And of course, the obvious reason why people are living in purple red conditions is simply because of the siege, for example, or the Israeli limitations, the Israeli laws that prevent, for example, the construction materials coming in, putting some struggles on any organizations or any institutions to be pulled. And I could then state other examples, but let me just go back to the some of my comments on how that memetic figure status when actually went. Also, number two, I think there is there's confusion between the material proof and the signs of what could be identified as purple red, for example, architecture or buildings or whatever, and also confusing this with the fact that maybe these people as well are also purple red. This, I think, a confusion that can happen. That we would see people living in sort of like materialistic signs that would suggest a purple red development stages, but that doesn't mean that it's because of the choice of the people. These people are really eager for blue orange values in general. They eager for having an organized authorities, having some businesses going on, jobs, success. They're really achievers, and that's just because they're not satisfied with the life conditions. So it's normal that you will see the Palestinian people wanting to go and develop these things. But anyways, in these memetic figures, I think these points were really confusing for the figures, the memetic figures, and how they played in the graphs in the end. While in Israel, for example, you can see the orange buildings, the organizations, the clean streets, the better life conditions, and then you will assume that these people, then, I'm not saying that they're not, but I'm just saying that this confusion could happen. So, yeah, and also the other thing is that, number three, most of the research, Elsa and Dombeck, Dr. Dombeck, actually were like targeting the political parties like Fatah, Hamas. They were not. I wasn't seeing any like very major research about the people themselves, like actual everyday Palestinians. And when there was like actual research of the regular everyday Palestinians and how they value, so we can determine what spiral dynamic stage they are. The more questions were more about politics. They were more about like, what's your solution of the politics situation? But I didn't see them really doing the same with the Israelis. They were talking about business. They were talking about these other things. So I'm just saying that they were not, as Veronica said, or I thought she said that there was not enough sample of the people who were like under such research. I mean, the fact that they didn't even include Gaza, they didn't even include many of the Palestinian cities, they didn't even include the refugees outside. So this is really not a very good representation of, I believe, the Palestinians and in their own different like faces. Also, when they're asked their opinion about how the political struggles could be solved, I believe a lot of Palestinians would give a more like lower stage, answer, because they don't believe the Israelis would agree, because they don't think that the Israelis would agree, for example, on a two-state solution or even one-state solution. So I guess they then give a more depressed type of solution, which puts them a little bit lower on like the development stages. So I'm just saying that in my own in my own personal observation, I wouldn't put at all Palestinians in purple red. Not because of that only, but because you can clearly see some orange businesses, orange organizations, blue authorities, even green NGOs and green activism, Palestinian green institutions. So how can we ignore all this? Like, we have tens of hundreds of them, and how can we ignore of this? I can't see this really represented in the memetic figures, and I'm just saying that it really doesn't make sense for me and for a lot of people who are more like deeply involved in Palestinians and the Palestinian side. Yeah.
Sal, I just want to say that I really, really hope that my graphs are incorrect and that you are right. For me, it's a big hope what you're saying.
Well, maybe this is a really good opportunity for you guys to work together. I mean, Tsafrir, if you're going to continue to do this work, Sal understands spiral dynamics. She's Palestinian, so maybe you guys could work together. I think that would be great.
Oh, okay, we can discuss about it later.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to. Yeah, I would love to. I would actually respect your work, and yeah, I respect your work, and I would really want to help add this. I believe the missing element of which is like the perspective of the other side, and not just the perspective and live there for years of their lives. So I think this is really important. I myself like encourage myself to go and do such talks and find like a yellow level type of solutions for this thing. So yeah, I have other comments if you guys don't mind.
Yeah, you can comment or you can ask because I haven't answered your question. If you, whatever you prefer.
Oh yeah. Yeah, please answer my question.
The motivation to do this presentation came from a SEO presentation that was in this group a few weeks ago, and I find out that it's a bit misleading, and it's not helping to solve the conflict. And my motivation is to have a sustainable life for Palestinians and for Israelis and for anyone on the planet.
Okay, so that's the motivation that I also thought. So what was exactly the the thing that you thought is misleading or incorrect or inaccurate?
This is why I did all this part of explaining the difference from green attitude and what I believe is yellow attitude. And I believe in the last presentation, it was mostly green, and it ignored, it didn't give any yellow solutions.
Okay, so from what I understood, that you were actually wanting to present a more yellow type of solutions rather than green solutions that were introduced in the previous presentation, correct?
Yeah, it's correct. And if I may add, the last part of the presentation where I had some suggestion what the international could do, but of course it's not only the international, it's also Israelis and Palestinians.
Mm-hmm.
These are something that nobody in Israeli politics understand, nobody in human rights, in peace organization understand. I work with these people, those are my friends. I explained it to some of them. They don't have this kind of thinking. And I know that this kind of thinking and this kind of recommendation are not, nobody talk about it. So I would hope to give some innovation on the way on what we should do to help create a healthier ground.
Yeah, that's really great. I myself involved in some Israeli Palestinian NGOs and agencies and organizations that actually want to focus on really having a better solution. And I do agree with you that only green perspective is not enough. But yeah, I would like to have some other comments before I ask some questions for you again.
Sure.
So I saw your presentation, and I have some few comments. When you were talking about the extremist narrative, I believe that this Palestinian extremist narrative that you suggest is way less popular. In fact, rare actually, compared to your maybe Israeli extremist narrative. And I have some maybe comments on why I think that. I have never actually heard anyone in Palestine saying that they want to eliminate anything that is not Muslim. I mean, this won't even make sense. For one, in Islam, which is the majority of the people there are Muslims. There's also Palestinian Christians and Palestinian Jewish. But in general, even in Islam, because you're saying extremists, and I assume that you mean somebody like Hamas. It is actually prohibited to treat Christians and Jews in a bad way. So I don't think that even an extremist Muslim that would not make him actually following Islam if this entity thinks about killing or eliminating anything that's Christian and Jews. And also number two, there are Christian Palestinians and Jewish Palestinians as well as other religions. For example, there are around, I guess, 90,000 Christians in the West Bank and 5,000 out of 2 million in Gaza. And there's also there was actually 47,000 Palestinian Jews before the state of Israel even established. So, I mean, it doesn't make sense, the fact that we want to eliminate all the other, Christian Jews. It would mean actually to kill each other, to kill the other Palestinians, and that's why it doesn't make sense. Neither in religion, like Islam prohibits that you kill the people of the book, and what we mean the people of the book are the Christians and the Jews. So it doesn't make sense from a religious perspective, and it doesn't make sense in a nationalistic perspective. But I have talked with other Israelis, and I would say that they generally have this fear, they have this fear that maybe because we came and establish our state, Israeli state in their land. Maybe they also want to come and kill us, and maybe people hate us, some shadows from the Holocaust. So I would really understand why it's about this, but trust me, I have never met anybody who thinks this. People really want just to have their human rights back to them, I guess. So anyways.
Jump in also,
While,
because I want to sort of echo your point, and I'm not at all, Tsafrir, trying to gang up on you, but I had the same reaction to the same slide, which is where you had like the Israeli the Israeli extremist perspective versus the Palestinian extremist perspective. And it seemed really uneven to me, because the Israeli extremist perspective is, this is our land, and God promised us this. And that doesn't seem that extreme to me, actually. And I think most Israelis, even non-religious ones, feel like they have some entitlement to the land, versus the Muslim, the Palestinian / really, I think it's supposed to be the Muslim extremist perspective is, we want to kill all non-Muslims. So that's like way more extreme. It's not even on the same, for me, it's not even on the same level. And I think that, this perspective is actually, this V-meme of Muslims want to kill non-Muslims is actually stronger in the West and in the non-Muslim world than in the Muslim world itself. I think it's this preconception that people have, because there are some verses in the Quran that talk about jihad, but I mean, anyone that understands Islam well knows that these verses were revealed at a specific time for a specific situation of conflict that allowed for self-defense, and this is not like a general injunction for all peoples for all times. And so I would agree with Sel that this idea that Muslims should kill non-Muslims in certain situations is, that mentality doesn't exist. As far as I know, at least I've never, in my Muslim circles, never ran across anybody that believed that. I feel like I hear that more from Muslims.
Can I just say, okay, I am not, as an Israeli, I have no right to say it, and that there is no symmetry, because it sounds bad. I'm aware of it. I just urge you to learn. There was supposed to be an election in the Palestinian West Bank 2 months ago. It was canceled. There were polls. I saw those polls. Those polls said about more than 30%. Correct me if I'm wrong, Sal, maybe you saw it too. More 30% wanting the Hamas in the West Bank to go into power. Of course, in Gaza, you must be part of the Hamas. And even if you don't believe in it, you must share with these powers. And the Hamas ideology is the same as ISIS, and this is jihad. This is not my imagination, or this is not coming from me as an Israeli. I believe that as an Israeli, I should be more careful and politically correct and not saying, but so I urge you, go and learn. If we want to solve the problem, we have to talk to the extremist. And if we want to talk to the extremist, it's very easy to ignore the extremists in your side. I said the Israeli is extremist. I want to deal with them. I met with them this Sunday. I met this Sunday with a right organization that claim that Israel should take by power, and that means if it's necessary to kill Palestinians, and for me it's crazy extremists, but it's a huge power in the Israeli society, and I admit that it exists. And I think most of the left is not ready to or can deal with it psychologically. So you need to go into second tier in order to understand those forces, acknowledge them, and address them. It won't help to just to put it under the carpet. So maybe I'm wrong. I really hope I'm wrong. I urge you to go and learn. Go do your homework too.
Okay. Thank you. I do think I did my homework. I lived around these, what you call them, extremists for 9 years. I've been keep saying. I talked with them. I know people who are involved in these people, in these quote unquote extremists. But you just, I mean, sorry, but you just talked about Hamas in a way that is still not very accurate. So yeah, I believe there's like a line or a chain of bad assumptions that made you maybe think in this way, or like think in this way. And I'm also, number two, I don't really I'm not against the fact that there is extremists. There's an extremist Palestinian side, of course, but my point is it's not this narrative that you're suggesting. There is another narrative that is still extremist. And I would say the extremist narrative that we have, and I saw in Palestine, is more about we want to end the Israeli Jewish state, and we want to kick them out. And that's the most extremist things. It's not about killing anything that is not Muslim, or it's not about you know um, it's not about killing everything that is Muslim, that is not Muslim. So the extremist thing is free all Palestine, like the historic map of Palestine, and that's gonna be the most extremist view in the Palestinian society that I noticed, that I met and talked to these people. I worked as a journalist, as you're saying, and I went to these people and talked with them like face to face. So I believe I did my homework when it comes to this. And I'm just saying that I agree with you. There is an extreme narrative in Palestinian society, but I'm just saying that it's not this exact narrative that you're saying. It's not about killing everybody. It's not about only Muslims. It's not about converting people into Islam. It's not about that. And it has never was that. It's about kicking all the Zionist people outside and have like our Palestinian land, like, back to us before even the British colonization. That would be a radical, I would say. That would be a radical solution if it's a solution. That's why I think it's an extremist thinking. And that's the most extremist narrative that I noticed from my experience and my work with these people.
Yeah, and
So-
I just want to jump in real quickly and say that do not have experience interviewing Hamas or ISIS, so I'm not experienced, but I can say that from what I know, ISIS is in a whole another league of their own. I mean, they beheaded people and they took Yazidi women and enslaved them. And I don't think Hamas has done anything like that. Of course, they are taking terrorist tactics and launching missiles and things like that, which are definitely terrorist acts. But I mean, ISIS for me is in a slightly different league because they take the whole conversion thing to a whole nother level, which I don't think Hamas is quite at. They're that like reactionary red, defend our territory type. We're going to make our own army. We don't have an army, so this is an army. Like that's how I understand Hamas. Aside,
exactly.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's really, yeah, that's really what I think as well. So let's just make it clear. Hamas is not jihadi. Like they're not about the stereotypical idea of like jihadi, go and bump, selves. And I do think, yeah, there was people who are like going and blowing themselves in buses or like in popular like public places, as well as Israelis. There were also extremist Israelis like doing these, killing and burning of some other people. So I don't think this is just a like one-sided act. I think it's a very red act from both sides. But anyways, Hamas is not a jihadi type of thing. It's not about, because your jihadi is more of like we want to conquer and we want to expand and we want all of this. Basically, Hamas believes in the two-state solution, and that's in their charter. You can go to the charter and you can see this. And the two-state solution, they believe in the Gaza and the West Bank should be Palestinian territory, and we're just gonna defend these Palestinian territories. So this is what they believe. They're not about going and conquering the Israeli agreed on land today. They just want to establish freedom or like liberty or independence in the Palestinian territories today that are Gaza and the West Bank. And they are supporting the two-state solution. It's not like ISIS at all. It's not kidnapping Gaza or the Gazan people. Gazans are not Hamas's victim. Hamas is not using Gazans as human shield. Hamas existed because of Israel's insult on the Palestinians. And I want to also note that before Hamas actually ruled Gaza, there were already restrictions on movement and economy, and there was some form of siege on Gaza before even Hamas took control, as he say. But actually, Hamas went elections. It went fair elections. The Gaza people voted for Hamas. It's not that they kidnapped the people or like forced them to obey them. So and because of these insults that were actually similar to what we can see today happening in the West Bank, restrictions, limitations, governing the economy, governing what happens for the Palestinians, where they go, where they come. There was the same situation in the Gazan side, and these are the insults that actually made something like Hamas want to actually take vote and have become the authority there. So Hamas existed because of Israel's insult on the Palestinians in general, not only in Gaza. It's a defending party. After all, if Israel would give the Gazans their human rights, lift the siege, and stop the wars, then Hamas would stop the locally made rockets. Hamas actually supports the two-state solution, as I said, agreed upon with the United Nations. So it's simply defending a Palestinian territory, while Israel still continue its control of Gaza, which is another form of occupation. Like Israel would say that we have actually left Gaza. We have evacuated from Gaza. But that's not typically correct. We are still in Gaza in another form of occupation. We cannot import, export. I had to really cross borders. We don't even have an airport. We cannot build an airport. We cannot fish in the sea. We cannot, there's always airplanes all over our heads. We have only 4 hours of electricity every day. We don't, 90% of our water is polluted. It's all like, and it's not because of Hamas. I would want to stress this point again. The things were happening like this in Gaza before Hamas even existed. Things were even worse when Hamas won the elections. So that's a distinction I wanted to make. So going back to the extremist thing, yeah. So I was saying that this extremist narrative is not actually the extremist narrative. I would suggest another type of extremist narrative, which is actually, as they say, kicking all the Israelis, the Zionists, and get back our Palestinian land all for us. That's the radical type of too radical for me, I would say. But on the other hand, while for Israel, Jewish people look at their religion to be I would say, ethnicity or even a race. So they would have, more religious justifications for their extremist ideas toward those who are not Jewish, both in religion and or ethnicity. But in Islam, there's no such narrative. If you convert to Islam, which is easy to do, then you are my brother or my sister. And if you are not, you are still a Jew or a Christian that I'm obliged to actually respect and even protect you if need to be. So, I mean, even the fact that the Zionist people, the Jewish immigrants went to Palestine on the promise that this is the Jewish land. This is like the land that was promised for us by God, and we are the chosen people. This already in the religion. So I would say that they will start from this purple reasoning of why we want this land, while in Palestine that was not the case. They start not from a religious point of view. They start from like, this is a nationalistic point of view. You guys took our land. It's not about, it's not even mentioned in the Quran that it doesn't matter. That's beside the point. But the point is like, this is our country, you took our country. So that's that narrative. And that's why the extremist narrative for the Palestinians will go around this. We want to liberate this whole land for us because that's our land. It's not as religious as the Israeli one. I hope this point like clear.
Yes,
So,
okay. I can
okay.
relate to it. Of
Okay.
course, you know, I don't want to go into this argument because it's what we can agree is that is about the motivations that are coming from red in the both sides of the extremists. And I think those people need to be addressed. Right now, those people in both sides are just becoming more and more powerful and more significant. And those are people that making this conflict.
Yeah, I agree with you. Actually, a very sad fact that these people who are like red, purple, or even blue extremists, I would say, with some purple, red shadows, there are sadly the ones that determine the type of leaders that we're going to have, because they're going to be the ones voting, and the leaders of our, you know, Palestinian Israeli country should like pay these people. Like they should want to fulfill the desires of these people, or then they're not going to be seen as good leaders for them. And this is why we are stuck in this loop, that the type of people who are going to rule us are going to be these extremists, because or I would say these blue people who want blue solutions, or purple, red, blue solutions that's not actually helping anybody. Yes, there's blue Israeli and blue Palestinians, and the fact that we're both blue, or like have core blue, as I say, does not say that we will agree just because we both value blue, because your blue narrative is different than my blue narrative, and this is our land and this is your land, so it does not help. And I guess the way to break and actually break this cycle of voting for those people, those leaders, that could be maybe orange or could be maybe anything, but they are type of like need to fulfill the needs of the majority of the people, because they're going to be the ones voting for these people.
Sal and Tsafrir, it's been almost 2 hours, and the two of you have been talking me a little bit, and everyone else has been waiting patiently to have their say or ask questions. So what do you think if we open it up now?
Yes.
Yeah, that would be great.